let's bring in Joe Twyman, political commentator and co-founder of director of Deltapoll. He is a director of Deltapoll, I should say.
He's a co-founder of the director.
Joe, is there anything we can extrapolate from this circus, this shambles, this joke of a by-election? I mean, Labour technically didn't field a candidate, but given what George Galloway has said, which is basically a rallying call to Muslim communities all over Britain, he's saying, you've had your backside slapped, this is for Gaza. I mean, what can we draw from this in terms of the direction of travel of many constituencies around the country?
Well, by-elections are always unusual for a host of different reasons, and this by-election was unique. The combination of not just one but two parties disavowing their candidates, a former candidate and indeed a former MP running as a new party, and an insurgent candidate in George Galloway, made it very, very different from things that we've seen before. It has been the case that one of those has taken place previously, but to have all three, as I say, is unique. Therefore, it's very unwise to extrapolate what this would mean at a general election, or indeed in any other contest, because of the unique circumstances. What we don't know, and we can speculate on this, but we don't know how Labour would have fared with a candidate that had gone through the process without any problems and they'd campaigned heavily for. I think it's unlikely that George Galloway would have triumphed, and certainly would not have triumphed to the degree which he did last night, had that been the case, given how well Labour are doing nationally. And so can we say that George Galloway will triumph in other constituencies with a similar approach? Well, without the combination of factors and without George Galloway himself actually on the ground campaigning, I think it's difficult to see that. It's worth pointing out that where he has triumphed previously, there does tend to be a larger Muslim community. In Bradford West, for instance, it's 59% Muslim. Rochdale is only 30%, so smaller than that. But he didn't triumph, for instance, in Poplar and Limehouse, and similarly in Batley and Spen. So there's no guarantee that in different circumstances he would do as well.
I guess what I'm asking you, Joe, though, on a broader level, is Labour's position on the Gaza ceasefire going to damage them? Because that's what George Galloway has said. In other words, unless Keir Starmer calls for a total ceasefire, Muslim communities, Muslim-dominated constituencies, there may be as many as 70 of them all over the country, will dump Labour.
I think it's very unlikely that would have a significant impact, because firstly, all the evidence we have suggests that the concerns for the Muslim community are broadly in line with the concerns of the rest of the country. They prioritise the cost of living, the NHS, and the economy generally above international aspects. For some people within that community, Gaza will be more important, and for some people it will be the most important issue. But they are relatively small across different constituencies, and those constituencies that we're talking about tend to have high lead for Labour anyway. And so these are safe Labour seats. And yes, the Labour share may fall, but I think for it to have an impact in a large number of seats, it's very unlikely to have an impact in a large number of seats given that situation, and then for that to have an impact on the overall result of the general election just seems very, very unlikely indeed.
John, I want to draw your attention back to these allegations that there may have been some degree of malpractice in this by-election, unsubstantiated, I'd say, for now. What we do know is that postal votes went from 15,000, registered postal votes, 15,000 to over 23,000, which is quite a leap, one would say. But what I want to ask you is whether or not, I mean, we've had previous examples of there being, let's say, malpractice when it comes to the postal vote in previous by-elections. Indeed, the Electoral Commission itself did a report warning against the fragility of the postal vote in certain communities. Is this something that we need to be looking into?
Yeah, no, I think we do, and I think what is extraordinary is that the Conservative government has focused attention on getting people to produce ID if they vote in person, but not doing anything to secure the integrity of postal votes, which in many ways are easier to manipulate. But I mean, I don't think there is any evidence in this case that that there has been any malpractice. We'll have to wait and see if there are complaints made. But I mean, there's nothing surprising about an increase in the proportion of postal votes in a by-election, because a by-election is when the parties are much more organised, much more focused on a single constituency, and so they would organise to get the postal votes in more than if it was a general election.
If I may say so, Mr. Rentoul, I'm adopting a sort of headmasterly type of tone here. You're being a bit shoulder-shruggy about George Galloway. You said, oh, we'll just ignore him. This guy got voted in a British constituency on what I would say was a kind of race-hate ticket. This is a dangerous precedent to set, is it not?
No, but he's done it before, Kevin, and it didn't actually change the course of history. He's a protest candidate. He's an opportunist. He's very good at exploiting single issues and special situations. As Joe said, this was a very unusual by-election. And the very interesting question is what would have happened if there'd been a Labour candidate who had remained endorsed throughout the campaign. Labour say the only reason George Galloway won is because they disowned their candidate. I'm not sure that's right. I mean, I think George Galloway might have done extremely well. But
by the way, John, sorry to interrupt. On that basis, it might be quite good for Labour that they had to withdraw their candidate, as it were, because if their official candidate had lost to George Galloway, that might be even worse news than they've got today with him winning. Yeah,
that is true, and it's bad news for Labour that he won anyway. Although I can see a sort of a silver lining in the sense that George Galloway's rhetoric is so incendiary, and he's so disliked by the vast majority of Labour MPs that I think his presence in the House of Commons might actually help Labour unite on Gaza now that Keir Starmer has adjusted the Labour Party's position.
Interesting.
Yeah, Joe, there's a big fear now that, not just a big fear, it's a threat actually made by George Galloway that I'm going to be a big problem for you, Labour Party, because you're not standing up for Palestine. How much of that threat is just the sort of tub-thumping rhetoric of someone like Galloway, or how much is this going to be an ongoing electoral issue as long as this conflict drags on in the Middle East?
Well, I think there's the question about the nature of the conflict itself, and if a ceasefire is brokered over the next few weeks or months, then that changes the dynamic significantly. And while I'm sure George Galloway's supporters will salute his courage, his strength, and his indefatigability, I think that actually his impact is likely to be most significant over the next few days and perhaps week or so as he basks in the publicity of his win, and then perhaps again as he enters Parliament and makes his, however many it is, 7th maiden speech. But I think beyond that, particularly next week with the budget, things will return, if you like, to normal, and his impact will be relatively small at a national level. But having said that, I'm sure the kind of messages he will be sending out will be well received by certain sections of the British population.
Joe Twyman and John Rentoul, thank you so much for your company. Excellent stuff.
Cheers, guys.